The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on The Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.
It's a debate that's been going on seemingly forever, and it's not which baseball team was the most dominant in history, because the answer to that is the 2005 Chicago White Sox. Rather, people around the St. Louis region have been debating for decades whether St. Louis and St. Louis County should somehow merge. One of the people who thinks that's a good idea is St. Louis Alderman Tom Oldenburg. The 16th Ward Democrat joins us to talk about that topic and many others. So let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, a candid conversation with the Show Me State's biggest political newsmakers.
I'm Jason Rosenbaum.
And I'm Joe Mannies.
That's Eric Greitens, Navy SEALs running for governor, and I'm really, really glad to be on with you, Jason and Joe.
I'm going to push back on these regulators.
I'm doing this for the people.
I was encouraged along the way, not just by my family, but by a lot of teachers and professors, and knew when I was in college that I would run for office someday.
We're very excited about the prospect of having some more free market solutions.
Even though after the conversation, I still might not agree.
We want our listeners to get a real sense of what drives these people.
They're actually people with a story to tell. And welcome to Politically Speaking, the only show about Missouri politics that approves of using an index card to determine whether you got a first down or not. I am that host, Jason Rosenbaum, interim political editor for St. Louis Public Radio, and I still like NFL football, even though the Rams left. Joining me in studio today is
Joe Mannies, who is cool on football ever since the Rams left.
Understood. And joining us today from the beautiful and glorious 16th Ward of St. Louis, we have as our guest
16th Ward Alderman Tom Oldenburg.
This is going to be a 16th Ward love fest because two people are in this room live in the 16th Ward.
Not me.
You live in Webster Groves.
Yes.
So we'll have to make sure to have a Webster Groves person on. Just introduce yourself briefly. Tell us also what the boundaries of the 16th Ward are.
Sure. So let's go the opposite of that. The boundaries of the 16th Ward are roughly Chippewa to the north, the River des Peres to the west, Mackland Avenue to the east, and Wilmore Park to the south, and Gravois. I mean, effectively, the 16th Ward services a majority, 60% actually, of the neighborhood St. Louis Hills, Lindenwood Park, Southampton, and a sliver of Princeton Heights.
Yeah, and the 16th Ward historically has been one of the long-standing, one of the few wards, sometimes the only ward in the city that had a significant Republican population.
That is correct.
And it still does.
And it still does. I would argue it's the only ward in the city where you cannot ignore a Republican challenger in the general election.
Which is what happened last time. But also, they are a pretty important voting block for any aldermanic race because many of them take a Democratic ballot and cross over.
Yeah, in the city of St. Louis, crossover voting is alive and well. Now, tell us a little bit about yourself so our listeners have an idea of who you are.
Sure, absolutely. I've lived in the city about 15 years. I did my graduate work at St. Louis University in urban planning and economic development. I gravitated more towards public finance in that field of study. It's where I met my wife. About 12 years and 3 kids later, I'm the 16th Ward Alderman. My day job is with U.S. Bank Community Development Corporation.
Okay.
So we do a lot of tax credit financing and other public-private partnership financing and economic arrangements. I've worked there. I'm a vice president, and I've worked there for about, it's coming up on 11 years. Let's see. Also, the 16th Ward involves a lot of neighborhood engagement. So I've been on the neighborhood association for the past 6 or 7 years before I ran for alderman.
And just tell me, we had this conversation in the green room. How much did you spend to win your race in April?
So we raised about $80,000, which is pretty significant for an aldermanic race.
Yes, it is.
And we spent about $65,000. I would say keep in mind that we were going against a very entrenched, name-recognized candidate.
Former State Representative Michelle Kratke, who had a pretty significant financial war chest of her own and also very high name recognition.
Yes.
Right. And a good political and government resume. to be honest.
So I just want to let our listeners know what happens when you spend $100,000 for an aldermanic race. It means people like Jason Rosenbaum and my wife, Lauren Todd, get a mailer every other day for 3 weeks. And I just want to thank both candidates for making my election season more robust.
And your recycling container pretty full, at least at the end.
So we're going to do something a little bit different that we haven't usually done on this show. We are going to play Joe's feature on the city-county merger debate for our guest. We usually do that before our guest comes on, but we want to actually use it as a jumping-off point to talk about that topic. Here is Joe's feature that she completed and aired last week.
Blame it on Missouri State Senate President Pro Tem Ron Richard. The Joplin Republican told St. Louis Public Radio a few months ago that it's time the General Assembly paid attention to the St. Louis region's long-standing merger debate.
The county has all these municipalities and all these little bitty fiefdoms that someday guys like me for rural Missouri is going to say enough's enough. You guys are out of money, keep passing taxes. I think that's not in the best interest of Missourians, so we're going to have to start merging.
Richard explained last week that he's simply calling for state lawmakers to discuss the idea, and he's not endorsing any specific proposal. Richard emphasized that he certainly would want to hear from local officials and lawmakers. Still, the Municipal League of Metro St. Louis is alarmed. That's why it has drawn up the resolution that it hopes the County Council and the St. Louis Board of Aldermen will support. The resolution asserts that a possible statewide vote might be looming and that it is, quote, a scheme to circumvent merger opponents in the city and county. League Executive Director Pat Kelly says the fate of any merger idea should be left up to St. Louis and St. Louis County residents.
It's kind of the foundation of our country. Your vote should count in the areas that it's going to affect you. It was kind of the whole reason for the Boston Tea Party, right?
But St. Louis Mayor Lyda Krewson doesn't see the threat. She welcomes Richard's interest and says it shows state legislative leaders recognize the importance of the St. Louis region to the state. Krewson has long been a supporter of government consolidation.
57 police departments, 89 or 90 municipalities. And so we're spending a lot of money delivering services.
She adds that the region's divisions do more than cost money.
We fuss among ourselves about where should this project go or that project go, whether or not a project goes in Clayton or downtown or Hazelwood or Wildwood.
Krewson maintains that all that bickering is preventing area officials of focusing instead on how to best compete against other metropolitan areas, such as Louisville, Kansas City, or Indianapolis. That's long been the message of Better Together, a nonprofit group set up several years ago to promote regional consolidation. Its financial backers include wealthy financier Rex Singfield, a fan of some sort of merger. Better Together held public hearings this fall to gauge the public's interest. Nancy Rice, Better Together's executive director, says there has been a common thread.
We have found a very strong appetite among a reasonably good-sized part of the population for change, particularly young people.
But County Councilwoman Hazel Irby, a Democrat from University City, says that's not what she's hearing. Her district includes many African-American municipal officials who fear a merger could dilute black political power.
I think that there should be more education around the whole thing. But right now, when I talk to my constituents, when we say merge, they're not in favor of it.
That doesn't surprise national urban policy expert David Rusk, who's the former mayor of Albuquerque, New Mexico. He was in town last week to offer advice to civic leaders. Rusk believes it's unrealistic to expect the St. Louis region's fragmented governmental structure to change.
You really shouldn't concern yourself very much with trying to formally merge governments, but rather devise ways in which they can collaborate together.
That's a message that many members of the region's municipal league might be able to get behind.
Thank you, Joe, for that wonderful feature, which
Right.
I also happen to edit. I wanted to play that for our guests because I know from talking with you during the campaign that the city-county unification merger issue is something that you've paid attention to for a while. So before we get to specific questions, I want you to just kind of explain your feelings on this topic, which is something that I think a lot of people in our ward have been paying attention to for a while.
Certainly. I think that reunification, merger, consolidation, cooperation, whatever kind of, cliche buzzword or catchphrase you want to put to it, needs to happen. I think it's, and the reason I say that is because I tend to be a data-driven, fiscal, dollars and cents individual, and we can't keep going as a region. And when we say region, I think we're meaning in context here St. Louis City and St. Louis County. We can't keep going on this unsustainable model whereby our peer cities, and peer regions spend about $800 or $900 less per capita in providing services. So those fragmented areas and those levels of bureaucracy do end up hurting constituents, residents, and families in the end. It's a very expensive model to continue to operate as we do. So then the question becomes, well, how the heck do you fix it? Where do you start unpeeling the onion? And the good thing is there's lots of smart people in our region, in our community, that are looking at this. I will say that this needs to happen, but I think it needs to happen incrementally, and we don't need to be impulsive with it. And I will just say this very, very candidly and bluntly. I think any kind of state General Assembly plan or legislation is a bit impulsive. And there needs to really be a discussion amongst the stakeholders and those most impacted in the region. They should have the absolute most say and be at the table, as opposed to outstate legislatures kind of deciding what's best for St. Louis City and St. Louis County.
I mean, how do you sell it, especially in the county, even though they may be more receptive to some sharing of services than they used to be, let's say even 20 years ago?
Sure.
The idea of even having the city re-enter the county seems to, they get leery. I was at county council meeting just last week where all the forum speakers, half of them were about merger stuff. Apparently they listened to St. Louis Public Radio. And so they were all like beefing about it. The different people for different reasons. But bottom line is it kind of underscored how it's a hard sell.
Yeah. And I think that's where we have to beat the drum, where the pocketbook is that this will affect your taxes in the long run. You can't continue to increase property taxes to provide levels of service, because when you increase property taxes or other taxes on constituents or residents, they want more service for it. So the bottom line is we're not necessarily giving more service in the region, but we continue to raise taxes just to hold what we're at. So I think the economic argument is really the way we have to sell it. And that becomes difficult, I know, because the county's a little divided in the way that its taxes are split up, whether you're in an A class or a B municipality, and how that works. So those are all very confusing and complex. And then the school districts, special road districts, you start layering in these other districts or government units, and it gets very complicated.
Now, I want to just ask, do you have a preference about how you would want to change the regional governance? There's many choices. One, as Joe alluded to, the city could join the county as one of 90-ish municipalities. There's also been an idea floated of some sort of unigov-like structure where St. Louis City and St. Louis County kind of merge into one mega county or one mega city. Even in the Indianapolis example, though, there were numerous cities that actually opted out of that.
There's about 15 little islands. I'm from Indiana, but there's about 15 little islands of other cities within the city of Indianapolis.
So I every time I ask the question about what you would prefer to a lot of politicians, they always say, well, I don't know. Let's let the process. Do you have a preference, though?
I think the first critical step would be for the city to join the county as what would it be, the 91st municipality?
Well, actually, because basically we would be the 89th. Right now they have 89. They have a couple, and another one is expected to vote on
McKenzie.
Yeah,
which I think a lot of 16th warders have probably driven through.
Yeah, absolutely. That's their they want to dissolve. So if the city re-entered it as it stands now, after April, they would be the 89th.
Yeah, and I say that, Jason and Joe, because I think that's, again, going back to the theme of this should be incremental. I think that is a good first step to figuring out how the region wants to align itself next and how we get more efficient as a region. There's also the borough system, which I know has been discussed and floated, that there would sort of, that falls into place with the Unigov, but I think the borough system could be one potential that isn't a complete consolidation of power, or wouldn't be perceived as a consolidation
Explain
of power.
that a little bit to our listeners, because that intrigues me.
Yeah, so effectively you would have one layer of government, call it the county, but you would be set up almost like New York City. Which,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Correct, and where they have the different boroughs. And there's sort of a borough, call it Borough 1 president, which would be located somewhere in St. Louis County, Borough 2 president, Borough 3 president, and then there would be representative and members among each of those. And the municipalities could roll up to that kind of consolidated power bench. And I would think that would provide at least, a more democratic process, or could provide a more democratic process to be evaluated.
I would just ask, though, if that occurred, would it be a situation where cities would actually have to buy into that system, or would it be more that there might be like a county citywide vote and a decision's made for them?
I don't know. I think it could probably go either way. I think you'd want to err on the side of trying to get buy-in from the municipalities.
The reason I ask that is I could see some cities never going along with that, which is why the question of force comes into play.
Sure.
Which is not a popular option.
Certainly, politically speaking, it's
not. But I mean, do I see Webster and Kirkwood and Creve Coeur and Chesterfield and Wildwood, Florissant voluntarily ceasing to exist? No.
Right.
I don't.
No, won't happen.
But if they are all part of one borough, right, and then there was their borough president had a representation within the region, within the landmass that makes up the city and the county, I think that could be a little intriguing, and potentially it would be less fragmented than certainly the model we're working in now.
Yeah, though it could be interesting in Webster and Kirkwood. They fight over their football team and
Thanksgiving.
This
is true.
So whether or not they'd agree to be in the same borough. But still, I mean, when you look at the forces, one of the things that I didn't get into because of time and space, I mean, it's been 141 years since the 1876 divorce. And since that time, are there things, I mean, because you're in finance, so you may have a sense of this. Are there dynamics at play for the city? I mean, obviously, some of them are simple, but I want you to talk about that propelled the city to do this in 1876, which ends up being a pretty bad decision, maybe worse than not moving the airport to Columbia, Illinois, and then the way things are now. I mean, because when people are looking ahead, sometimes they make mistakes, and I think in 1876. They had a vision for the future that obviously didn't play out. I'm just interested in kind of your thoughts and what you're hearing among board members about if you did certain things, how would the future play out?
Right. So that's a good question. And I think what you'll see from the city, and certainly I'll be an advocate of this, is we have to prove and sell our case for regionalism. And I think we've taken steps to do that. I think the fact that the Board of Aldermen voted to consolidate itself, cut the board in half, is one step to say we're kind of ready to, quote unquote, get our house in order and be ready to marry up. And I think that's a vision that looks forward, that says, we need to be a leaner, more efficient government. And nowadays everyone wants to make sure their dollars go farther than they should. And I think that's one important step. The other thing I think worth noting is we get this right. And I think we've seen this play out in certain aspects. MSD, for example, is a regional cog in the wheel of the St. Louis City and St. Louis County. Metrolink is another by-state, for Pete's sake, not just by county and by the city, but it's a by-state cooperation and collaboration that works. The Museum Zoo District, right? Again, that's a county and city partnership that works. So the economic partnership that also sits in Clayton right now, which basically says we're not going to fight over economic development opportunities in the city or in the county. The partnership is going to work on trying to bring net new jobs and net new investment Whether it's in the city or in the county, it's going to be good for the region. So I think those are important players to note in this, that this can work. And if you go back to when those started, I think you see the future of cooperation, efficiency playing out, certainly with those partnerships.
I'm going to play a clip from Will Ross, who is part of a 3-person panel set up by Better Together to come up with a formal merger plan. And the question that I asked him was, and he's an African-American official who works at, I believe, Washington University. One of the biggest sources of criticism of any idea has been this fear that merging the city and the county in an incorrect way could hurt black political power, which was alluded to in Joe's story. This is kind of a long clip, but I wanted to make sure that this was in context, and then we'll jump off of that clip right afterward.
Well, again, we also have to recognize that there is a reality in that opinion, and that opinion is based a lot of history in St. Louis, when the African American voice has been diluted intentionally through zoning policies, through restrictive covenants, through housing agreements, redlining gone awry. I mean, their history is there, and we have to recognize that also. And I truly would get it as an African American who's been in the city for almost 37 years. I know that history well, and I understand why, as an African American, as part of this community, I would have some skepticism about this, about our voting power, our rights being somewhat diluted. I can get that. Again, the key then is to structure a governance which truly is inclusive, a governance strategy which is based on this sense of egalitarianism, that we can provide opportunities, resources, affordable housing, communities that have well-functioning schools. We can jobs, which are clearly important, as we talked about creating empowerment zones in the past, and those empowerment zones have not translated into sustainable jobs. We can create a governance structure which includes the voices, the phenomenally sophisticated and effective leadership in our African American community. Without that, if we don't have that inclusive governance, then yes, the African American community has a legitimate right to be skeptical of this process.
So here's the reason I'm bringing this up. I think that in a scenario when the city joins the county as a municipality, I think black political power could be preserved in a number of ways. People would still elect the mayor of St. Louis, and the city is basically 50-50. So an African American clearly has a chance to win the mayorship here. And even in a county-wide race for county executive, the African American population would go up under that circumstance because you're adding the city of St. Louis and more African American voters. Now, under a unigov situation where both the city and the county elect one leader, I think that there's a real strong possibility that an African American political figure would have a very difficult time of winning that, because I think the combined populations would be, 65-35, 60-40?
Yeah, something like that.
And you have situations like in Indianapolis, for example, where there's a significant African American population, but I don't believe under a unigov system an African American has ever won.
They have never had an African American mayor, unless I'm wrong. I'm almost positive Indianapolis has not.
So I want to just know, based off the clip from Dr. Ross there, how much consideration for a white politician like yourself do you take into this? Because it might seem like an odd question, but I think that it's probably the most important question, especially after Ferguson and especially after Jason Stockley.
No, I would concur. I think there needs to be a discussion where the African American community doesn't feel as if their representation is being diluted or that there's a larger power grab. Now, I would welcome ideas and policies from the African American community on solutions to that during this process. I will tell you, though, just from and this is going to sound maybe just incredibly academic, but having a powerful executive, right, or a strong mayoral system, if you will, tends to get results and tends to really move a community or move a city, certainly in the ways of economic development and in providing services to citizens. It's much more efficient than a decentralized approach to government and decision making. So that's, I struggle with that balance, but we need to be very respectful of it. So that's why I think, to your point, Jason, I think we can preserve policies. There can be structures in place with this discussion that make sure this doesn't come off as a power grab or that African American or Black power is somehow diluted in the process.
So this will be a topic we'll be looking at probably until we're all dead, because it may not be resolved then.
Yeah, maybe take another 140 years.
But I do want to move on to other topics, because I know that you have had a busy few months at the Board of Aldermen. You mentioned at the outset that you're kind of within the economic and development and tax incentive realm for your professional job. How has that kind of bled into your job as alderman? Because I think you've actually been working on examining the city's incentives and restructuring them. I'd like you to kind of delve into that.
Certainly. Well, I think as humans and professionals, we always gravitate to where our interests lie. So when I'm in my public life, I tend to focus more on the city's budget, fiscal discipline, but more importantly, economic development strategies, and the economic development incentives we're using, primarily TIF, tax abatement, are the most common features or tools that a city will use. I was lucky enough to get selected on the HUD's committee, the Housing, Urban Development and Zoning
Probably one
Committee.
of the most important committees in the entire Board of Aldermen.
Yes.
Would you say so, Joe?
Yes.
Certainly the busiest, I would argue, absolutely. Also the Neighborhood Development Committee, which handles a lot of the residential tax abatement projects. So between those two projects, also a very busy committee, between those two projects, between those two committees, there's a lot of work to examine in how we're using our incentives. And the city did a strategic plan or study of its incentives a few years back to kind of say, are they working? What are some solutions to get more bang for our buck? Let's just not throw away tax revenue. And I would say the underlying theme in that study was that it's too much of a political process, meaning that the aldermen have way too much input in the economic development incentive process. And I think that, to Chairman Joe Rohde's credit, I think he's taken steps from that study to whip SLDC into shape in the sense that let's hire a financial analyst. Let's be looking at this from a return on investment to the city, as well as helping an impactful project, with its gap financing, where a gap may occur. So at his urging, SLDC hired a financial analyst, whereby they are examining each project on a case-by-case basis. That's over $1 million, right? We have to have a scale here.
Yeah, and I think our listeners should understand SLDC stands for the St. Louis
Development Corporation.
Development Corporation. Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. So they are professional economic development practitioners, an arm of the city that looks to recruit, retain businesses, et cetera. And they are professional, so that's why I think it made sense for Chairman Rohde to say, you should house a financial analyst that looks at not just citywide our economic development incentives, but on a project-by-project basis. Are they delivering an ROI to the city and a return on investment to citizens and constituents? And through that process, we adopted Resolution 33 out of the HUD's committee and was passed by the Board of Aldermen, which really set interim guidelines for SLDC to administer when they're evaluating projects over a certain dollar amount. So, for example, in Resolution 33, some of those guidelines are that each project will go through a comprehensive review by economic development professionals at St. Louis Development Corporation around architecture, urban design, more importantly, though, the financial characteristics of that. Let's evaluate a developer or a real estate professional or an operating business's pro forma. How are they projecting? Are those assumptions reasonable? And then what you get there is you really get to trim the fat down to say this is exactly the precise amount of incentive that they need. Here's the gap in their budget. And that way we're not just saying, oh, well, gosh, it's better than what's there now, 10 years full tax abatement or a 23-year TIF of $10 million. This is sort of putting, in my mind, a practical, pragmatic approach with parameters to say we're only going to give projects and folks sort of the precise amount they need. And the way to do that is let's do the arithmetic. So this really allows us to kind of crunch some numbers. Where I see it going, and this is something that the chairman has tasked me with on the HUD's committee, Chairman Rohde, is to let's identify other performance measures associated with the use of our incentives. So not just what's the economic return to the city, right? When you're looking at that year is, okay, in the out years, how are property taxes, how are sales taxes, and maybe earnings or payroll taxes being affected next to our use of incentives? But what are some other metrics we need to look at? Population. How has the population changed over time where we tend to concentrate our incentives? Or has median household income grown? What about the school systems? Let's layer that in. So what other barometers should we be identifying when we want to evaluate the success of our incentives? And the hope, I'm being a little long-winded here, but the hope is with this project of identifying the performance measures and putting them, in a trend line next to our incentive use, the hope is we can begin to craft a business or an economic development plan for the city that kind of says, oh, great, by industry type, we're seeing a lot of success around eds and meds, right? Education, higher learning institutions, as well as healthcare research institutions. We're seeing a lot of traction along our use of incentives with that industry. But then also it can be locus-driven. Where should we be driving incentives, right? The Central Corridor sort of has had a plethora of incentives over the years.
What's interesting is the Southwest side has not had a lot of incentives. I believe your predecessor, Donna Baringer, told me there were very few instances where she requested commercial tax incentives. I think there were probably select instances, and I can certainly say that there have not been tax abatements on residences in St. Louis Hills.
That is accurate.
Yeah, I think one thing, I don't want to bore people too much with the history of this, but I'm a firm believer if you don't learn from history, you're destined to... Okay, because what happened in the 1960s, way before Jason was alive, was when A.J. Cervantes was mayor, and all of a sudden the city's population was sort of collapsing for various reasons, some racial, but it doesn't matter why. It matters what the result was. So he started tossing, and with the approval of the Board of Aldermen, a ton of incentives, tax abatement, all this stuff. So by the time I showed up, and some other reporters, like in the late 70s, there was already talk about what was working or what was not working because the city was saddled with huge tax abatements on a number of downtown buildings at the time. And this is when the city had a lot of Fortune 500 headquarters here. And so in the late 70s, and then they thought things were turning around, a lot of historic economic development going on. Then the federal tax cut package came in 1986, and I was in the Washington Bureau at the time for the Post-Dispatch and helped cover that. It really decimated development here in the city as far as older buildings or anything for probably about 10 years before the state stepped in and some other stuff. And so my question is, now when you're looking at this, some of those old tax abatements are long gone. There's some new ones that were put in place in the 1990s. But still, the climate and, of course, the population is less than half of what it was in the 1960s. So are there things that, is there discussion about, okay, that worked in the 1960s or 70s, we should try that. That didn't work, so God forbid we shouldn't do that. Is there any sort of discussion around that or looking about what's worked and what didn't?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where we're trying to reach out to community stakeholders to say, what performance metrics do you care about? For example, Forward Through Ferguson, they had a lot of calls to action in there, right? And I think a lot of those calls to action are based on historic policy that failed. Whether it's around policing, whether it's around the municipalities or are folks trying to just drive tax revenue. So it's what are your calls to action, right? And how do we as a city appropriately use incentives to achieve that call to action or that performance metric? For example, we know that life expectancy in certain zip codes or neighborhoods in this city is worse than it is in others, right? So that disparity exists. And so what are the calls to action around that those stakeholders, like really smart people in sociology, in academia, as well as practical folks with boots on the ground, what are the calls to action to bridge that disparity? And then how can we use our economic development incentives to aid in that call to action? So I would agree that studying history needs to absolutely be part of the process. We can't just keep getting on the same merry-go-round. And I would say this process is going to take a little while, but I think it's different in the sense that we've never had a comprehensive plan in this town that was truly adopted. And I think having an economic strategy that exists for all 79 neighborhoods and speaks to how we use our economic development incentives through the city's small little tax code, right? The mini way that we're able to manipulate economic development should be prioritized, and we need to start that conversation.
Now, I know that this part of the reason we're talking about this is there's a very vocal group of people in the city who have been very critical of tax incentives. They say that it drains money from city services, the schools, and that there needs to be a pretty drastic either rethinking or reduction of them. The question that I always pose to them, though, is, as we've talked about in the first part of the show, we're not operating in a vacuum here.
Right.
There are going to be cities in St. Louis County that would be more than happy to use incentives to get big companies to locate there, and
Kansas City,
and
Indianapolis, Cincinnati,
St. Charles County as well. I think people in St. Louis and St. Louis County need to stop thinking of St. Charles County as this backwater, place that they disparage all the time.
It's the fastest growing county
when
in the
it's
region.
the fastest growing county in the region.
in the state.
And they're already attracting a lot of manufacturing and other jobs. So how do we have this discussion without thinking what do we do now affects businesses going elsewhere in the region? Because St. Charles is not going to merge with St. Louis City and St. Louis County, and the discussion we just had is going to be years in the making. How do we take that into account?
Right. So that's where I think, a couple of things there. One is it is a regional approach, so we need to drive more resources to the economic partnership, an organization that I brought up earlier in this segment, that says, hey, we're both the city and the county, wherever economic development can happen, it's good. It's good on a regional basis, and it drives jobs. But I think, more importantly, I think we need to have a conversation about just uniformity and predictability. At the end of the day, a real estate professional or a business can locate themselves in Clayton, and Clayton can give them all the incentives that they desire. Now, is that right based on the median household of income that's in Clayton? And will a business thrive and succeed in Clayton? In most cases, probably yes. I think it comes back to us saying, we understand there's this kind of anarchic system of states and we're all competing for tax dollars. But if we could, there's more than always just an economic incentive package here. And that's where I think our economic development plan needs to craft, to say, we need to be competitive on incentives, but we need to make sure we're giving the absolute amount necessary or that's needed. But more importantly, let's drive, now this is anecdotal, but let's drive the area of our economic development platform where we're seeing success around entrepreneurship, around the millennials and startup businesses, Cortex, T-Rex. These are folks that if you ask them, they don't care about tax abatement. They don't care about an economic development package. They want government just to do the simple things and do it well, which is provide me safety, provide me public transportation, provide me diversity in all things, diversity in architecture, diversity in culture, and create and have me located next to Research One institutions. And that fabric, in my mind, is what I think we need to be focusing a lot of our energy on. But we have to continue to do, the certain baseline economic development incentives to stay competitive. But if we grab that strength that we're seeing, sort of that emergence, which is this entrepreneurial spirit and startup businesses in St. Louis, I think that's the ticket to help us around the region and around. When I say region, I'm thinking Midwest here, Kansas City, Nashville, our competitors in that realm.
Yeah, you mentioned diversity, and I actually, this is a jumping off point that I wanted to bring up. St. Louis is still a very segregated city, and not only segregated racially, but segregated economically. You have places like Southwest St. Louis, which I think are thriving in multiple ways, but they're still fairly homogenous racially. You have places like the Central Quarter, which are more diverse, and I think that they're also, doing pretty well. And then you look at the predominantly African-American parts of our city, and you just see them struggling with crime, disinvestment. You don't see a lot of businesses coming up there. How is that going to be taken into consideration? Is there anything aldermen can do to change that reality? Because, you could probably stand on a street corner in St. Louis Hills and say, I want more African-American families to live there, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen if they can't afford houses there, or vice versa. So I know that might be kind of out of the power of an alderman, but I'm interested as somebody who looks at development a lot, how that structural reality affects this entire conversation.
Yeah, well, there's market realities to the answer of your question, meaning that there's been decades of disinvestment in certain areas of St. Louis.
Yes,
and
this was an issue in the late 70s when I covered the Board of Aldermen.
Mm-hmm. So there's no silver bullet, and I think you realize that, Jason, but I think it's worth saying out loud. There's no silver bullet that fixes this overnight, and what can the Board of Aldermen do? I think, a fallback position should be we have to start thinking holistically or more citywide on our approaches to policy. So one of the first things I did after I got elected is to try to build relationships with Northside aldermen, because I know that this disparity exists. I know that there's been decades of disinvestment in certain Northside neighborhoods. So I took a tour of Jeffrey Boyd's ward. I'm scheduled to also do a similar thing with Pam Boyd in the 27th ward. I've reached out to Mr. Bosley, Alderman Bosley, and Alderman Muhammad to take a look at their wards, because I think it's important that we see what happens and what some of those aldermen are working with. Some of those wards I just mentioned and those aldermen, they have thousands upon thousands of LRA properties or vacant parcels that exist up there. To be honest with you, I think that should be a problem for anyone who lives in Southwest City or lives in the Central Corridor or lives downtown, because we should care that there's that much disinvestment in our city. And the success of those wards also means the success of the southwest portion of the city or downtown. So I come back to, and I don't want to be a broken record, but I come back to an economic development plan that has to address that. And we've been talking about that for years. And that's something that I think we need to give more focus and resources to. But it's hard, right? Because there's folks who want to talk about an audit that might potentially cost money. So do we do that over an economic development plan?
Well, what's your take on that?
Yeah. What's your thought about that? And
Great.
What's your thought about an audit?
Certainly. So I think government can always be more efficient. I think audits I think the key word here is can help in aiding a solution around more government efficiency or waste and spending. But it depends on the scope of the audit, right? Can we do it? My question is, and this is an evolving discussion, but can we do it without a cost, a burdensome cost to the city? Can we use the tools that already exist, right? The comptroller's technically sort of our chief and auditor of the city. Can we take the past audit, which was a citywide audit done in 2008, between 2008 and 2010, I think, by then State Auditor Susan Monty. And I read through that entire audit. And at the end of the day, though, it's important to qualify an audit's a management tool. It's just going to say, here are some practices or policies you might want to implement because here are the inconsistencies we saw. It's not binding. It's not law. You present that audit to the department head or to the county office to which the findings were looked at, and they can sort of say, okay. There's no teeth that really says you have to implement those policies or those findings within the audit. So I worry about wasting an incredible amount of money and time auditing various parts of the city to come to what conclusion? I think if the scope of the audit is defined in a very narrow way of what we want to achieve with it, and if it is, a revenue audit, or if it is a fixed asset audit, what type of review do we want to do? But what I will say, getting back a minute to the audit that was previously done that looked at a 2-year window between 2008 and 2010, basically the findings were there are a lot of county offices, which are creatures of state law, and not subject to home rule vis-a-vis the city's authority, and they need to cooperate more because the accounting system in the comptroller's office is different from the accounting system in the then assessor's office and is different from the license office. So the bottom line from that audit was there needs to be more cooperation among those accounting offices. I can't tell you today whether that's happened since 2010. If any of those findings were implemented. I know the assessor's office has taken great lengths to update a lot of its models to be more efficient. I'm not sure about the comptroller's audits or recent accounting practices. So that's where let's see if anything got implemented from that audit first.
Because what is being proposed now, I think both in the petition drive and possibly the Board of Aldermen, is having Nicole Galloway come in, which sounds like,
this is state auditor.
State auditor, which sounds on paper like, that's a great solution. She has a lot of staff. But the thing is, it costs like $1 million to $2 million.
Correct.
It's not like she does it for
and
free.
Could take 2 or 3
and
years.
The city has to pay that.
Yeah,
it's not
that's right.
The state's not going to cover the bill.
And it's not out of the question that she could start the audit and another person ends up finishing it depending on what happens in her reelection bid.
Yeah.
So,
good point.
At this point, do you think that is the direction you think your colleagues are comfortable with, or do you think the cost is the big hang-up here?
I think for me, it's going to be the cost is the big hang-up. Can we use the existing resources we have in the comptroller's office? Can we look at the audits that are done on a routine basis, either by the comptroller or others, to try to save money as opposed to what is going to be a lengthy and expensive process? To me, it's going to be the cost. I will state emphatically here that I think audits are, if the scope is defined right, a great tool for government. I mean, government should always be operating as efficient and as lean as possible, and audits help us uncover that. My hang-up is the cost, and then if we're going to spend the darn money, let's make sure we have some teeth to implement what those findings are.
So that's going to be determining whether you vote yes or no or not. The
Absolutely.
Cost, the scope, and whether there's teeth.
You got it.
It'll be an issue that will be following along with all these other issues. Thank you so much for coming on our show. We look forward to having you on 60 more times because I always give special preferential treatment to the 16th
We didn't
Ward.
even talk about a lot of 16th Ward specifics, but maybe next time.
Yeah, we can talk about how David Francis is one of the greatest St. Louis leaders ever, and the statue that is going to be built in his honor in Francis Park is well overdue. Now, that might sound like sarcasm to our listeners. Read about this guy. This guy was incredible. He was the only mayor to ever become governor. He later became governor to Russia and had a dramatic escape during World War I. And he wore a top hat all the time. So I hope that the statue includes a top hat. For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Jay Rosenbaum is where you can follow me on Twitter. Joe?
It's Jay Mannies. It's JMANNIES.
How would we follow you on Twitter?
Sure, it's Oldenburg, OLDENBURGSTL.
And make sure to subscribe to his newsletter if you're in the 16th Ward. It is an excellent newsletter. Until next time, so long.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.